It floats through the air guided by the simplest of gestures. The Ghost drone, developed by Guangzhou-based Yihang, is on a mission to allow Americans to use their personal smart devices to fly a drone like a pro.
We are more focused to those people who has no experiences at all in flying a drone. So they have no idea about how to use a controller.
Yihang is finding the U.S. to be its biggest market, which is why it's set up a Silicon Valley office that's rapidly expanding. It's also raised nearly $900,000 by using crowdfunding site Indiegogo and raised around $10 million from international and Chinese venture capitalists. In the U.S., the number of tech startups with Chinese founders has exploded, leading to the formation of incubator and accelerator programs focused on taking cross-border innovation to the next level. InnoSpring works with about 50 startups to educate them about China and help them connect with investors with a global vision.
We're trying to become the gateway to China in Silicon Valley, and we started advocating the idea of spreading ideas and getting innovated by tapping into the global market and information flowing around, and trying to educate founders in Silicon Valley to think globally at really early stage.
While startups seek to create the next big thing, big Chinese tech companies are also gaining a presence in America by setting up research centers. Chinese search engine giant Baidu has come to America searching for talent.
Baidu USA started in a small Silicon Valley office 4 years ago. In June, they moved into this brand new headquarters in Sunnyvale, California, where they now have 140 employees. They're growing, expected to expand to 200 people by the end of the year.
We try and recruit the talents in the Silicon Valley to help solve some of the tough problems in technology and to help build the greater systems to make for the China market.
While most Chinese tech companies focus on China, a few are delving right into the U.S. market. Internet and TV maker LETV announced this year it was planning to introduce this smartphone as well as an entire ecosystem, mobile, TV, cinema, and even electric car, eventually to the U.S. market.
We want to set the bar higher, and we want to continue to push the bar higher, so that we can really advance the industry together.
LETV opened a Silicon Valley headquarters to be its innovation center and a Los Angeles office to serve as its content center, a move expected to create several hundred U.S. jobs. Mark New, CCTV, San Francisco.
For more on this, we're now joined here in our Beijing studio by Ms. Jia Ning, Director of the Center of Globalization of the Chinese Enterprises at the Tsinghua University School of Economics and Management, and Mr. Jay Huang, founding partner of Jadestone Venture and former managing director of Intel China. Welcome you both to World Insight tonight. Thank you. So many have pointed out that Seattle is really an unusual stop for President Xi Jinping's visit to the U.S. He chose Seattle over Washington, D.C. as the first stop. So what is China sending by this trip? What message do you read here?
I'm not quite sure this is something unusual. In my opinion, I think I need a West Coast stopover city. And if not, Seattle would be at San Francisco, for example. I think the message is quite clear is China welcome high-tech company continue doing business in China.
So it's really a pragmatic choice.
That is my view.
Right. Well, I think another reason is because if you look at the 8th U.S.-China Internet Industry Forum is actually being held in Seattle, and President Xi Jinping actually not only participated but also spoke at this forum. So I think this sends a very strong, clear message to the world saying that China is really emphasizing on innovation and entrepreneurship, and Internet has become a sector that has strategic importance to the Chinese economy going forward.
I want to bring into context that during President Xi Jinping's speech at the welcoming dinner in Seattle on Tuesday evening, he outlined steps for deepening cooperation between China and the U.S. He said that the areas where China and the U.S. should and can cooperate are actually very broad. So many tech experts have pointed out that Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit that started in Seattle really broadens the way that both countries can work together. So I would like to ask your opinion. What area can the two countries work together? Of course, there are a lot, and tech can be a big area, but what else?
I think Seattle can be called the second Silicon Valley, in addition to the Internet Summit and Professor just mentioned. We also have a Boeing there. We see that China signed a big contract, probably the biggest ever, with Boeing to purchase 300 airplanes from Boeing. So that's one area we can see. And in addition to Boeing, and then in the high tech and area, with a lot of things we can cooperate together, and also we can see more China's company and high tech company and come into U.S. market, and also the U.S. company continue coming to China, both ways.
What's your take on this?
Well, I think both China and U.S. are powerful economies, so of course there are many opportunities for collaboration. But I think for this particular trip, I think President Xi Jinping sends a very clear signal that innovation entrepreneurship is definitely one major area to focus on. Especially, I think this message echoes very well with the so-called mass entrepreneurship and innovation strategy that was enacted last year in China. Right? If you look at university students in China upon graduation, many of them actually go for founding their own companies and becoming entrepreneurs. Right? So I think this is definitely one area that's really worth looking at this point.
We'll talk about technology cooperation later in this program, but I want to really touch upon the topic of cybersecurity. This is some topic that is touched upon every time the two leaders talk with each other, even during Chinese New Year greetings, when Barack Obama called President Xi Jinping to greet him Chinese New Year celebration. So in the same speech, President Xi Jinping also reiterated the country's stance on cybersecurity. Let's have a look at what he said. He said China is a staunch defender of cybersecurity, but it is also a victim of hacking. The Chinese government will not, in whatever form, engage in commercial theft or encourage or support such attempts by anyone. So as we know, Xi's visit takes place against a backdrop of accusations from both China and the U.S. of the government-backed or military-backed cyber hacks. So this, there's another meeting that took place in Beijing, a 4-day meeting, which intend to deal with this problem, and it is expected that President Barack Obama and President Xi Jinping will reach some kind of deal regarding cybersecurity when they meet in Washington, D.C. So what kind of agreement can we expect, and what kind of details are entailed in that agreement?
I think President Xi Jinping's statement on the cybersecurity is very significant. I think this promise and is a big step forward, in my opinion, because on the U.S. side has been repeatedly requiring and then say no and like a stealing and IPR and no stealing on the trade secret, etc. I personally thinking on the U.S. side is a little bit hypocritical because the underlying statement is, hey, we can spy each other. By the way, just don't do on the trade secret. Of course, U.S. is is leading on the technology side. There's no need for U.S. to do such a thing. So I think that this time China says we're not going to do this and that kind of thing. This is a very important step forward, and I'm hoping this will lead to some kind of treaty on the cybersecurity side, maybe similar as a previous like a nuclear arms treaty. Hopefully, I think if we can come to that agreement, I think it is a step forward, big step forward. Two countries and work together.
This is, of course, a trust issue. So what kind of reasons are behind this?
I think you hit the right word on the trust. I think this is very important and also very challenging to win trust from each side. My observation is that so far we see a lot of accusation, but without any proof. I think there are some reasons, and then previously we see and say, for example, U.S. accusing China doing such and such, and then the Chinese government coming back to say, show us the evidence, and then we can fix it. And nobody is willing to show the evidence. And I think for two reasons. One is on the hybrid side, if you show the evidence, that could tip the other side to say, oh, I know this is how you protect your network. So the next time I maybe do it better. So this is maybe one of the reasons. Another one is that some of the companies are doing like firewall, etc. They're also doing the business in China. They are maybe scared, and if they show up too much cooperation with U.S. government, may damage their business in China. So for whatever the reasons, it looks like we have lots of accusation without evidence. So this is a difficult, and then to for both sides to work together and then to win the trust. I see this is the challenging part.
Well, we've seen a lot of similar accusations. For example, economic espionage. We've seen the wrongfully charged poor professor in Temple University physics professor Xi Xiaoxing, and he was dropped with all the economic espionage charges. So we're seeing a lot of hinders from the governmental level rather than the unwillingness to cooperate on the grassroots and between enterprises. What are the reasons behind this?
I think that in the past few years, I see the environment and in this area seems to be getting worse, and lots of companies get concerned. Like for example, this is on both sides. For example, Huawei's entrance into U.S. market has been banned by the U.S. government, and also there is a reported Chinese government requirement for using domestic product in the communication and internet area. So as we all know, in China, like from the computer, the CPU and the operating system and the routers and the banking system, etc., all provided by U.S. companies. And if this initiative become like an action, so we can see the danger for U.S. company coming into China's market. Meanwhile, if this really happens and China also loses the opportunity to use the most advanced technology in the domestic market, I think that China also benefited with this mutual collaboration in the past quite a few decades. And then we see China's gap with the world leader as actually shrinking. So the concern is if we're going backwards, and then the gap with the modern technology maybe become bigger, and at the same time the U.S. company lose an entrance to the China market.
I want to bring in another guest here from Cambridge, Massachusetts, U.S., Mr. Jason Pontin, editor-in-chief and publisher in MIT Technology Review. So, Mr. Pontin, welcome to World Insight here. My question is, how is the general mood in the U.S. regarding cooperation technology-wise in the U.S.?
I think President Xi Jinping's visit was heartening. He said all the right things. It was a very reassuring speech. But the message coming out of the closed-door sessions, I think, expressed a deeper skepticism amongst the heads of American technology companies that the reassuring words that the president said will be followed by real action and reform. But at the higher level, there is a great hunger for improved technology cooperation between the two countries.
So talk to us about the skepticism that you have just said. You said that they want action rather than words, but we're seeing a lot of cooperation in Seattle. The deal is signed in Seattle. Those are mostly market or capital cooperation rather than exchange of technology. Do you agree?
I do. The cooperation that large tech companies are looking for are the ones that are being talked about for years. A clear IP regulatory system. But there is a broader concern. At the moment, the ratio of Chinese investment to the United States is 3-to-1. So for every dollar invested in China by a U.S. company, $3 are invested by Chinese companies. And that's because the government and regulatory oversight between the two countries is not comparable. In the United States, government reviews are rare, and when they do occur, they usually approve a Chinese commercial investment in the States. By contrast, the Chinese government has vague and broad demands about investment. So there's the difficulty of investment. And of course, as your previous guest was talking about, many American technology companies are quite concerned about cybersecurity issues at the moment. There is a broad perception, whether it is valid or not, that commercial secrets have been stolen by Chinese government agencies. and there's a strong desire to see that their data capital be protected.
Stay with us there, Mr. Pontin. We'll talk to you later in this program. I would like to ask our studio guest here. So, Ms. Jia, let's talk about the skepticism and some of the uncomfortable feelings when both countries invest in each other about the business environment, for instance, in Silicon Valley and here in Beijing.
In terms of?
In terms of the policy support,
right.
in terms of the business environment here.
Right. Well, I think for U.S. companies that want to tap into China, well, they understand clearly that China is a market that's just too huge to be ignored. But I think U.S. companies are facing two major challenges or concerns coming to China. One is the IP protection, and the second is whether they are playing in a leveled playing field, in the sense that whether they are getting the same treatment as the rest of Chinese companies. So if you look at Google, if you look at Facebook, they all have very strong intention to come to China, and Google actually tried, but unfortunately it did not work well, very well at the end. So I think for them to come into China, on the one hand, they know they have to come in if they want to maintain a strong foothold in the global market. On the other hand, I think these are some of the regulatory issues they need to sort out before they decide they can come in.
If you look at the Uber example, they are making sacrifices or compromises. They start their own Chinese, very domestic local company here in order to get into the market. Will that model work for any other enterprises?
Well, what's interesting is back in 1979, when China just opened up to the outside world, the first wave of foreign companies coming to China, they all opted for joint venture. So basically partner up with a local Chinese company to get local knowledge, local know-hows, and basically have a local partner who can navigate the complexities of the Chinese business environment. But the Uber versus Didi story, right? So of course, I think these emerging unicorn companies are facing similar challenges. These are uncharted territories for them, and if they want to do well in China, as a first entry, it may be helpful to find a local partner. So, but in fact, if you look at what Didi is doing this time in Seattle, the company actually entered into partnership with actually Uber's competitor, which is I think a company called Lyft. So it's interesting to see how the dynamic is going to evolve over time.
Let's turn to our MIT guest there, Mr. Jason Pontin. Your take on our studio guest, Ms. Jia Ning's rhetoric here.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Our studio guest, Ms. Jia Ning, here has pointed out the business model that may not be easily copied by any other companies here in China, because Uber is a unique case, and during the very first years when foreign investments are taking place here in China, they always opt for venture capital, but now they want to start their own company here in China.
Yes, Uber is an interesting example, as your guest was saying. The company made a large number of compromises to enter the Chinese market, and it had the capital to do so. It also had many fewer security concerns, and it was structured differently than a company like Microsoft or Facebook or Google, whose essential capital is data capital, is IP. Uber, at its heart, is an algorithm for creating a market between drivers and passengers. And it's a franchise. So I'm not sure Uber is a good model for how companies like Facebook or Twitter or Google might finally be permitted to enter the Chinese market, or how Microsoft might more fully engage with the Chinese market with less restrictions. But like your guest, I thought Uber's entry a really interesting development in 21st century economics.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Jason Pontin, Editor-in-Chief and Publisher, MIT Technology Review. I want to ask the studio guests here. So we've seen a lot of exchanges between the two countries. Technology-wise, they are holding back because of, for instance, security reasons. We're seeing a lot of exchanges in capital form, but not in technology form. Why is that?
Sorry, what's the question again?
We are seeing a lot of technology exchanges, but really those are possibly business models, concept ideas, but not hardcore technology. why the boundaries are still existing between the two countries?
I think the IPR protection is one hurdle, and then foresee the new technology transferring and coming to China. This is an obvious reason. And also, I think that for China, people start pay attention to the IP protection more and more, because we start to see lots of domestic innovation, truly a grassroots domestic innovation coming up. Their number one concern is actually it's the same as a foreign company doing business in China, is how to protect their innovation from their competitors, domestic competitors, and stealing their innovation. So we can see, and their concerns are quite the same. So I'm happy to see more and more people in China and realize the IP is very important. And then we see more laws coming up and to protect the innovation. I think the missing part is really on the government, and to make sure, and if you see a violator, you truly get the real punishment. And so scare people away from stealing other people's innovation.
Thank you very much for your analysis on this. That was Ms. Jia Ning here in the studio, and Mr. Jay Huang, and earlier Mr. Jason Ponting. Thank you very much.